Welcome aboard, fellow enthusiasts, as we embark on another incredible video. Hello, dear viewers. Get ready to expand your horizons as we delve into Vernon Berrangé. Vernon Celliers Berrangé SCOT, Defender of the People, 25 November 1914 September 1983, was an eminent South African human rights advocate QC. As we transition, let's shed light on forebears and its relevance to our ongoing exploration. Berrangé's forebears were in the third wave of French Huguenots who went to the Cape via Holland in 1775 and, as history evolved, became Afrikaners Boers. The Berrangés were essentially a family of Dutch Reformed ministers, but they were also sick comforters, medical doctors, public servants, politicians, and advocates. His mother was Elizabeth Theresa Crowe. Berrangé's maternal grandfather, Johannes Celsius Crowe, of Danish extraction, was Special Commissioner sent from the South African Republic to Swaziland 1894 to 1898, head of the Boundary Commission that settled the border between Swaziland and Mozambique, Maputo, in 1897, and one of the Boer signatories to the Treaty of the Peace of Vereeniging. In this section, we'll be exploring family. Berrangé married 7 March 1930 Yolande Vivian Brewer, into Perez, born 1900, who loved and supported him in all ways for 50 years until her death 1980. They had one son, Jevon Perez Berrangé, 1931 to 2018, a daughter, Gelda Francis Berrangé, February 1927 to 2015, and a son, Eric Brewer, 15 June 1921. 30 March 2010 from their respective earlier marriages. With the foundation laid, let's embark on a journey into education. Berrangé was born in Pretoria soon after it had been occupied by the British during the Anglo-Boer War. He received his primary education at the Volksreal Gymnasium in Berlin and at the German School in Johannesburg 1911. His secondary school was Hilton College, Natal, where he is commemorated on a plaque as Scholar of the Year. On leaving school 1917, he enlisted as one of Major Miller's recruits and became a lieutenant in the Royal Air Force, being trained in Kent, UK. After demobilisation 1919, he returned to South Africa and worked briefly for the Institute for Medical Research before going to the University of Cape Town, from which he graduated 1924 with a law degree BA-LLB. Get ready for an exciting part as we dive into recreation and other interests. Berrangé was an immaculate dresser and had a penchant for high living and fast cars. He was always against authority, loved the challenge, and revelled in danger. He was a very active man, both intellectually and physically. Sports at school, in the RAF, and at university included boxing, rowing, rugby, and swimming. Later he became a motor racing driver 1932 on South African circuits. He had a large collection of sporting firearms and was keen on big game hunting and bird shooting. His considerable knowledge of guns and ballistics was something that he found useful in some of his criminal cases. In the years he had an interest in a small gold mine in Swaziland. He read avidly and travelled widely in Africa and Europe. Brace yourself for an enlightening exploration of communism as we dive into its profound implications. Berrangé joined the South African Communist Party of his own volition in about 1938, holding the opinion that it was an organization which expressed in practice those economic and social theories which appealed to him. Berrangé was an ordinary member attached to the central branch in Johannesburg, except for a period when he was on a committee dealing with industrial legislation and trade union work. Berrangé resigned from the SACP in 1950 when and because it was dissolved, after the passing of the Suppression of Communism Act 1950. Berrangé later reappraised and radically changed his views, to become critical of the theories and practices of the party. Despite this change of views, he remained friends with some former comrades and subsequently was a member of the team defending Bram Fischer in court. Moving forward, we'll be taking a closer look at legal career. Berrangé was admitted to the South African bar in 1924, but in 1926 he left the bar and went into partnership with his father, James Louis Stein Berrang, born 16 October 1931, as an attorney. He remained at the sidebar until 1950, when he was readmitted to the bar, where he remained until his retirement in 1966. Berrang built up a reputation as an outstanding criminal defense and human rights lawyer with a reputation for devastating cross-examination. He was a co-founder of the Organization for Rights and Justice and chairman of the Legal Aid Society. As such, he was often willing to accept briefs in cases where non-whites were charged under the discriminatory apartheid laws, and in such cases usually acted pro bono. Get ready for a captivating exploration as we unravel the layers of special wartime duties and their profound significance. In 1941, Berrang was charged with special duties by Brigadier General Collier, Military Secretary to General Smuts. These duties included seeking out fascists who might be infiltrating the armed forces. After the Second World War, however, Berrang would find himself increasingly involved in defending the human rights of those prosecuted by the nationalist government, some of whose members had been supporters of the Nazis. Moving forward, we'll be taking a closer look at Alexandra bus boycott. Following the Alexandra Township bus boycott 1944, organized in response to the bus companies raising bus fares by a penny, the government passed emergency legislation that prohibited all meetings. Communists Bram Fischer and Berrang discovered a legal loophole in this legislation, which meant that the boycotters could still assemble and march. However, when discussing this loophole over the phone, their lines were tapped by the police, who thereby learned of it and hastily redrafted the legislation. The boycotters won their concessions in the end. This was the first of many times that Berrang and Fischer worked together for justice for the oppressed. Moving on to the next segment, we have African mine workers' strike. In 1946, whilst he was on holiday in Europe, Berrang received a phone call from Bram Fischer asking him to return to South Africa to defend him and others on a charge of inciting the African mine workers' strike. This was strongly supported by the SACP. Some 70,000 African miners took part in this momentous strike, which lasted 5 days before it was violently put down by the police at the cost of 11 miners killed and more than 1,200 injured. The 52 defendants pleaded guilty to aiding and abetting a strike, but they received relatively modest sentences. In this section, we'll be exploring the F.M. Alexander case. Together with others including Harold Hunson and Bram Fischer, Berrang acted for Fahrenheit M. Alexander in the high-profile Alexander libel trial, which caused an international stir. Berrang was initially introduced to the Alexander technique by his wife, Yolande. As all close family members were having Alexander lessons from Irene Tasker, who had been taught by Alexander in New York and London, and his son Jivan was attending Tasker's Montessori school. When Drive Ernst Jockel, director of physical education to the South African government and apparently hostile to the Alexander technique, asked Tasker to demonstrate the technique, she arranged for Berrang to be present as a legal witness. Upon reading Jockel's subsequent article in the SA government journal Volkspracht, Berrang was of the opinion that it was libellous and suggested that Tasker show it to Alexander, whom subsequently started libel proceedings. As instructing attorney for Alexander, Berrang journeyed to London in 1946 to help prepare the case with his client and English counsel. He became friendly with Alexander, who joined Berrang and his wife Yolande and the Barlows, Bill and Marjorie, Alexander technique teachers, on a short holiday to France. The trial proper was heard in South Africa in 1948. Alexander won his case and was awarded damages. Let's transition to the treason trial and uncover its significance. The circumstances which led to the South African treason trial, the proceedings, and the conclusion some 10 years later, all demonstrated Berrang's personal qualities and professional skill. In 1951, when the leaders of the Congress movement developed a plan involving deliberate defiance of the apartheid laws, Berrang was consulted on its legal implications. After the Defiance Campaign, during which some 8,000 volunteers went to prison, in 1955 the Congress of the People organized a convention, attended by thousands of delegates, to present the Freedom Charter that was essentially a call for a democratic South Africa in which all shall enjoy equal human rights. The nationalist government's reaction to this was to arrest 156 people and charge them with high treason, a crime punishable by the death penalty. The accused represented a cross-section of South Africans from all walks of life and included Oliver Tambo, Chief Albert Lafuli, winner of the Nobel Peace Prize, Helen Joseph, and Nelson Mandela. The formidable defense team included Berrangé, who, in a stirring opening address at the preliminary hearing, contended, inter alia, that the ideas and beliefs expressed in the Freedom Charter, although opposed to the policy of the government, were shared by the overwhelming majority of humankind, of all races and all colors, and also the overwhelming majority of the country's citizens. He argued that the treason allegations amounted to a political plot comparable with the Inquisition and the Reichstag fire trial, and were an attempt to silence and outlaw the ideas held by the accused and the thousands whom they represented. This vibrant address was published in newspapers around the world. The state alleged that holding the Congress of the People and adopting the Freedom Charter constituted steps towards the establishment of a communist state and the prelude to revolution. They aimed to show that speeches and writings by the accused were communistic. Probably the most farcical event in the trial occurred when expert witness for the prosecution, Professor A. H. Murray of the University of Cape Town, gave evidence on the nature of communism and the infallible clues that he claimed indicated certain statements and speeches were communistic or communist-inspired. Berrangé's cross-examination was dramatic. He read out a number of statements by various people, and the professor agreed that these were the sort of statements that communists make. Berrangé then revealed that the statements had been made by persons such as former SA Prime Minister Malin, President Franklin Roosevelt, William Pitt, Heine, Luther, Voltaire, Milton and Jefferson, and finally one written by Prof. Murray himself in the Urs. The accused had been arrested in December 1956, but it was only in March 1961, after numerous hearings, that by unanimous verdict the court found all the accused not guilty and Berrangé was carried aloft outside the court. Our focus now turns to move to Swaziland and retirement, an important aspect of our discussion. In 1959, Berrangé left Johannesburg to live in Swaziland, where he acquired citizenship of the United Kingdom and colonies, thereby forfeiting his South African citizenship and passport. He continued to practice law intermittently, both in the Republic of South Africa and Swaziland, until his full retirement in 1966 and resignation from the Johannesburg Bar. The proceedings of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission show that South African government continued to keep Berrangé under close surveillance whenever he visited the country. He was briefly on a committee whose purpose was to afford assistance to political refugees from South Africa. In 1963, at the time of the Rivonia arrests, two suspects, Harold Walpe and Arthur Goldreich, made a spectacular jailbreak from the Johannesburg fort and eventually managed to get to Swaziland, where Berrangé helped by arranging a charter plane to fly them to Bechuanaland, Botswana. Berrangé died in Swaziland in 1983 at Siki, Lubombo. As we transition to the next segment, let's unravel the mysteries surrounding the Rivonia trial and gain a fresh perspective. The Rivonia trial was the outcome of a raid on Liliesleaf Farm at Rivonia near Johannesburg on 11 July 1963, when police arrested 7 alleged members of the armed wing of the African National Congress, seizing many highly incriminating documents of their activities and plans. The accused included Walter Sisulu, Ahmed Carter, Raymond Luba, Rusty Bernstein and Nelson Mandela, who had been arrested later upon release from jail. The charge was sabotage and the death sentence seemed likely. The defense team was led by Bram Fischer and included Berrangé, whom he asked to come from Swaziland. He accepted unhesitatingly despite risking excommunication from the legal profession, as he knew that the government was drafting legislation which would permit them to debar any named communist from practicing law in South Africa. Berrangé had special responsibility for the defense of Bernstein, Rabai and Cartwright. Once again, his devastating cross-examination exposed inconsistencies and outright lies in the testimony of many of the state witnesses. With the exception of Bernstein, all the accused were found guilty and sentenced to lengthy jail terms from 22 to 27 years but avoided the death penalty. Prepare yourself for an in-depth analysis of LookSmart verbal inquest in this section. As part of a crackdown following the Rivonia raid, in mid-August 1963 the police arrested LookSmart Kulungudal, a regional leader of Umkhonto we Sizwe. 16 days later he was found hanged in his cell. Despite the police's best attempts at suppression of the cause of his death, they were eventually forced to hold an inquest. Berrangé represented Ngudal's widow and decided to turn the inquest into a forum on police torture. When the court deemed evidence of torture to other detainees as inadmissible, Berrangé withdrew from the proceedings in protest. The matter was subsequently raised in Parliament by Helen Suzman, to the great embarrassment of the government. Now, let's redirect our focus towards trial of Rusty Bernstein and discover its significance in our narrative. Shortly after his acquittal in the Rivonia trial, Rusty Bernstein was arrested again on 3 charges under the Suppression of Communism Act. Berrangé again, Rusty and his wife Hilda were thus able to flee to the UK via Botswana. Now, let's redirect our focus towards the Fisher trial and discover its significance in our narrative. Berrangé's last political trial was defending his friend and colleague Brown Fisher, who along with 14 others had been charged in 1964 under the Suppression of Communism Act. In the event, Fisher realized the futility of his case and whilst the trial was in progress skipped bail and went underground to continue the struggle against apartheid. He was recaptured 9 months later in November 1965, put on trial for a second time, found guilty and sentenced to life imprisonment. As we transition, let's shed light on award and its relevance to our ongoing exploration. In 2010, Berrangé was posthumously awarded the Order of the Companions of O.R. Tambo in silver for his excellent contribution to the struggle against racial oppression in South Africa. I love hearing from you, so leave your thoughts and suggestions in the comments.